The fluorescent lights hummed their endless song above the factory floor. It was the kind of sound most people stopped hearing after a week on the job. Background noise, white noise, nothing noise, but Marlene Dawson was not most people. At 36 years old, she had spent 12 years walking these concrete floors, 12 years learning the language of machines, the groan of metal under stress, the whisper of hydraulic fluid through aging seals, the heartbeat of pressure systems that kept this entire operation alive. And right now, something was wrong. Marley stood motionless in Sector 4, her steel-toed boots planted firmly on the oil-stained concrete. Her calloused hands gripped a pressure gauge, but her eyes were closed. She was listening, not with her ears alone, but with every fiber of her being, the way her father had taught her, the way old Walter Brennan had refined during her first years at Hartwell Industrial. There it was again, a high-pitched whistle, barely audible over the rhythmic thunder of the machinery around her. Most workers would have dismissed it as nothing, a quirk of the ventilation system, a loose fitting somewhere in the maze of pipes overhead. But Marley knew better. That sound was pressure finding a way out. That sound was metal beginning to fail. That sound was a warning that something deep within Sector 4 was building toward disaster. She opened her eyes and checked her watch. 4:37 in the afternoon. Sophie would be waiting at the front gate by now. Her 7-year-old daughter had learned to do her homework on the metal bench outside the main office, swinging her legs and watching the trucks come and go while waiting for her mother's shift to end. It was not an ideal arrangement. Marley knew that. But when you are a single mother with no family nearby, you make do. You adapt. You survive. She had been surviving for 3 years now. 3 years since Daniel's funeral. 3 years since she had held his hand in that sterile hospital room and promised him she would take care of their little girl. 3 years since cancer had taken the only man she had ever loved and left her to face the world alone. The memory hit her like it always did, sudden and sharp. Daniel's smile, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he laughed, the sound of his voice reading bedtime stories to Sophie, doing all the character voices until their daughter giggled herself to sleep. Gone now. All of it gone. But she could not afford to dwell on that. Not here, not now, not with that whistle growing louder in her ears. Marley pulled out her phone and typed a quick message to Marcus Webb, her most trusted colleague on the floor. Check main pressure line Sector 4 when you get a chance. Something doesn't sound right. She hit send and began walking toward the exit, her mind already calculating the repairs that might be needed, the overtime hours, the budget requests that management would probably deny, the corners that would be cut because someone in a suit decided that safety was less important than quarterly numbers. That was the new reality at Hartwell Industrial. 3 months ago, everything had changed. The company had brought in Victor Hale as the new operations manager. His mandate was simple: increase efficiency, cut costs, meet production quotas at any price. Victor was 42 years old with an MBA from some fancy business school and absolutely no experience on a factory floor. He wore tailored suits that cost more than Marley made in a week. He carried a tablet everywhere he went, tapping at spreadsheets and production reports with perfectly manicured fingers. He had never felt the burn of hot metal through work gloves. He had never tasted the copper tang of fear when a pressure gauge spiked into the red zone. He had never carried the weight of knowing that one wrong decision could kill the people standing next to you. To Victor Hale, the workers at Hartwell Industrial were not people. They were numbers on a spreadsheet, resources to be optimized, problems to be eliminated. And Marley Dawson had become his biggest problem. She found Sophie exactly where she expected. The little girl sat on the metal bench outside the main office, her legs swinging back and forth as she worked on a math worksheet. Her backpack lay open beside her, crayons and pencils scattered in cheerful disarray. Sophie looked up as Marley approached, and her face split into a smile that made everything else disappear. The exhaustion, the worry, the weight of the world pressing down on her shoulders, all of it vanished in the light of that smile. "Mommy." Sophie jumped off the bench and ran toward her, arms outstretched. Marley caught her daughter and lifted her up, breathing in the strawberry scent of her shampoo. The same shampoo Daniel used to buy because he said it reminded him of summer. "Hey there, sweetheart. How was school?" "Good. Mrs. Miller says I'm getting better at my times tables. I only got 2 wrong today instead of 5. "That's wonderful, baby. I'm so proud of you." Marley set Sophie down and began gathering the scattered school supplies. Her daughter chattered happily about her day, about the boy who ate a crayon at lunch, about the book they were reading in class, about the friend who had a new puppy. Normal things, innocent things, the small joys of childhood that Marley fought every day to protect. She was zipping up the backpack when her phone buzzed. A message from the front office. Emergency meeting, conference room A, immediately. Marley's stomach tightened. Emergency meetings were never good news, especially not under Victor Hale's regime. Sophie, honey, I need you to wait here for just a few more minutes, okay? Mommy has to go to a meeting. The little girl's face fell. But you said we could get ice cream today. And we will, I promise. This will only take a minute. Marley kissed Sophie's forehead and walked toward the conference room, her boots echoing against the polished floor of the administrative wing. The contrast always struck her. Out on the factory floor, everything was practical, functional, built to withstand the demands of heavy industry. But here in the executive area, everything was designed to impress. Leather chairs, glass walls, artwork that probably cost more than the annual salaries of half the workers combined. Through the glass partition, she could see them waiting. Victor Hale stood at the head of the long table, his tablet clutched like a weapon. Gerald Whitmore, the plant owner, sat at his right hand. Gerald was 63 years old and had built Hartwell Industrial from nothing. He should have known better. He should have trusted his people. But something had changed in Gerald over the past few years. The hunger for profit had consumed whatever remained of the man who once walked the factory floor alongside his workers. Now he saw only numbers, only margins, only the bottom line. There were others in the room, supervisors and department heads, all of them wearing expressions that ranged from nervous to afraid. Nobody made eye contact as Marley entered. That was when she knew. This meeting was about her. Victor's voice cut through the silence like a blade. Mrs. Dawson, thank you for finally joining us. The emphasis on finally was deliberate, calculated. Victor Hale never said anything by accident. Marley positioned herself near the back wall, her arms crossed over her chest. Through the glass, she could see Sophie on the bench outside. The little girl had spotted her mother and was waving her small hand, moving back and forth like a metronome. Marley managed a small wave back before turning her attention to Victor. We have a serious problem, he began. His eyes locked onto Marley with predatory focus. Yesterday afternoon, someone decided to shut down production line 3 without authorization. That decision cost us 4 hours of production. 4 hours. Do you have any idea what that means in terms of quarterly targets? The room remained silent. Nobody wanted to be the next target. I shut down the line because the pressure readings were erratic, Marley said, her voice steady. I've been working these systems for 12 years. When those gauges start jumping around like that, it means something is building up, something dangerous. Victor's laugh was sharp and cold. And yet, when we restarted the line this morning, everything was functioning perfectly. The readings were normal. The output was normal. The only thing abnormal was the 4 hours of lost production because you decided to play hero. Those readings weren't normal. Something is wrong with the pressure regulation in Sector 4. I heard it again today, a whistling sound that shouldn't be there. A whistling sound. Victor repeated the words as if they were the punchline to a joke. You shut down an entire production line because of a whistling sound. Marley felt the anger rising in her chest, but she forced it down. She had learned long ago that losing her temper never helped, especially not with men like Victor Hale. Mr. Hale, with respect, I've been maintaining these systems since before you knew this company existed. That sound I heard today is pressure finding a way out. It means there's a buildup somewhere in the main line. If we don't address it, enough. The word cracked across the room like a whip. Victor slammed his tablet down on the table, making everyone jump. I have heard enough of your expert opinions, Mrs. Dawson. What I see is an employee who thinks she knows better than management. An employee who costs this company money every time she decides to override established protocols. An employee who creates problems just so she can swoop in and solve them. He turned to Gerald Whitmore, his voice shifting to something smoother, more persuasive. Gerald, I've been documenting Mrs. Dawson's behavior for weeks now. The unauthorized shutdowns, the questioning of management decisions, the negative influence on other workers. I believe it's time we make a change. Marley's heart stopped. She looked at Gerald, searching for some sign of the man who had hired her 12 years ago. The man who had shaken her hand and told her that good mechanics were worth their weight in gold. The man who had sent flowers when Daniel died and told her to take all the time she needed. But that man was gone. In his place sat a stranger who looked at her with cold, calculating eyes. Victor is right, Gerald said slowly. We've been patient, Marlene, too patient. But this pattern of insubordination has to stop. It's not insubordination. Marley's voice cracked slightly. I'm trying to keep people safe. I'm trying to prevent a disaster. What you're trying to do, Victor Orton interrupted, is make yourself indispensable by inventing crises. I've seen this before. Workers who sabotage systems just so they can be the ones to fix them. Workers who spread fear among their colleagues to protect their own positions. That's insane. I recommend immediate termination. The words hung in the air like poison. Marley looked around the room searching for an ally, but every face she saw was turned away. Eyes down, mouths closed. Nobody wanted to be next. 12 years. 12 years of giving everything she had to this company. 12 years of missing her daughter's school plays because she was working overtime. 12 years of coming in on weekends and holidays because someone had to keep these machines running. And now it was ending like this. Gerald Whitmore cleared his throat. Victor's recommendation is approved. Mrs. Dawson, your employment at Hartwell Industrial is terminated effective immediately. Security will escort you from the premises. You'll receive your final paycheck by mail. The room began to blur. Marley blinked hard, refusing to let them see her cry. She would not give Victor Hale that satisfaction. You're making a mistake, she said quietly. Whatever is happening in Sector 4, it's real. It's dangerous. And when something goes wrong, remember that I tried to warn you. Victor's smile was triumphant. Security will see you out. Marley walked through the conference room door on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. The fluorescent light seemed too bright. The sounds of the factory seemed too loud. Everything was sharp and strange and wrong. Sophie was standing now pressed against the glass partition with her small hands splayed against the surface. Even from a distance, Marley could see the fear on her daughter's face. Children always knew when something was wrong. They could sense it in the air, like animals sensing a coming storm. Marley dropped to one knee and opened her arms. Sophie ran into them, burying her face against her mother's neck. What's happening, Mommy? Why do you look sad? It's okay, sweetheart. The lie tasted bitter on her tongue. We're just going home early today. Isn't that nice? But I saw that man yelling through the window, the one with the fancy suit. Was he mean to you? Marley stroked Sophie's hair, the same chestnut brown as her father's. The same color that still made her heart ache every time she looked at it. Sometimes adults have disagreements, baby. It's nothing for you to worry about. The walk to the locker room felt endless. Marley was aware of every eye on her. Every whispered conversation that stopped as she approached. Every colleague who suddenly found something fascinating to look at on the floor or the ceiling, or anywhere except her face. Marcus Webb was waiting by her locker. His dark face was creased with concern, his massive arms crossed over his chest. Marley, what the hell happened in there? They fired me, said I was creating problems by reporting safety concerns. Marcus shook his head slowly, his jaw tight with anger. That's bull and everyone knows it. You're the best mechanic this place has ever had. Doesn't matter now. Marley opened her locker and began pulling out her personal belongings. A photo of Sophie at her kindergarten graduation. A worn copy of the mechanic's handbook that Walter Brennan had given her on her first day. A coffee mug that said, "World's Best Mom" in faded letters. What about Sector 4, Marcus asked. That pressure buildup you mentioned? I tried to tell them. They didn't want to hear it. But if something goes wrong, then they'll deal with the consequences. Marley closed her locker for the last time. Or maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe Victor Hale is right and I've just been imagining things for 12 years. She didn't believe that, not for a second. But what choice did she have now? The security guard who arrived to escort her out was named Jimmy. He had worked at Hartwell for almost as long as Marley had. His eyes were red, and he couldn't meet her gaze as he walked beside her toward the exit. I'm sorry, Marley, he mumbled. I really am. I know, Jimmy, it's not your fault. Sophie held her mother's hand tightly as they walked. The little girl kept looking back over her shoulder at the factory as if expecting someone to come running after them to say it was all a mistake, that mommy could stay, that everything would go back to normal. But no one came. They were almost at the gate when Marley heard it again. The whistling, louder now, more insistent, coming from somewhere deep within the bowels of Sector 4 like a warning cry from a wounded animal. She stopped walking. "Mommy, what's wrong?" Marley looked back at the industrial building. Somewhere behind those walls, pressure was building. Metal was straining. Disaster was inching closer with every passing minute. She couldn't just leave. "Wait here with a Jimmy for a second, okay, baby?" Before Sophie could protest, Marley was walking back toward the main entrance. She found Victor Hale at the security desk, signing paperwork on his tablet, with the satisfied air of someone who had just won a great victory. "Victor," he looked up, annoyance flickering across his face. "You're still here. I thought security was escorting you out." "They are, but I had to try one more time. That sound in Sector 4, it's worse than it was this morning. Something is critically wrong with the pressure regulation. Just let me take one more look." 5 minutes, that's all I'm asking." Victor's expression shifted from annoyance to disgust. "What you're doing is pathetic. You've been fired, Mrs. Dawson. It's over. There is no crisis in Sector 4. There is no imminent disaster. The only thing there is a former employee who can't accept that her services are no longer needed. Listen to me." "No, you listen to me." Victor stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I've dealt with people like you before. Workers who think they're irreplaceable, who create drama to prove their own importance. It doesn't work on me. Now get off this property before I have you arrested for trespassing." Marley felt Sophie's small hand slip into hers. She hadn't even noticed her daughter approaching. Jimmy, the security guard, stood a few feet behind, looking miserable. "That sound," Sophie said softly, looking up at Victor with her wide brown eyes. "It's like the noise our pipes made last winter, right before they burst and flooded the whole kitchen." For just a moment, something changed in Victor's face. A flicker of uncertainty, a crack in his armor of absolute confidence, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. "How touching. You've coached your daughter to support your little performance." He gestured to Jimmy. "Get them out of here, now. And if Mrs. Dawson sets foot on company property again, call the police." Jimmy stepped forward, his face a mask of professional neutrality that couldn't quite hide the shame in his eyes. "Come on, Marley. Don't make this harder than it has to be." Marley looked at Victor one last time. She wanted to scream at him, to grab him by his expensive lapels and shake him until he understood. But what would be the point? Men like Victor Hale didn't listen. They never had. They never would. "When something goes wrong," she said quietly, "and it will go wrong, remember this moment. Remember that I tried to warn you. Remember that you had a chance to prevent it." Victor's only response was to turn his back and walk away. The parking lot felt like another world. The afternoon sun was beginning its slow descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. It was beautiful, the kind of sunset that Daniel used to photograph because he said every sunset was a reminder that there was still beauty in the world even on the hardest days. Marley lifted Sophie into the passenger seat of their old Ford pickup and buckled her seatbelt. The truck had belonged to Daniel. It had almost 200,000 miles on it and made concerning noises whenever it went over 50. But it still ran. It still got them where they needed to go. And every time Marley sat behind the wheel, she could almost feel Daniel sitting beside her. "Mommy," Sophie's voice was small, "are we still going to get ice cream?" Marley looked at her daughter's face. The hopeful eyes, the trembling lower lip, the brave little girl trying so hard not to cry. "Yeah, baby, we're still going to get ice cream." She started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot, forcing herself not to look in the rearview mirror. Behind her, the industrial building of Hartwell Industrial grew smaller and smaller until it was just another shape on the horizon. But she could still hear it, that whistling sound. It echoed in her ears all the way home. Through the drive-thru at the ice cream place where Sophie got her usual chocolate cone, through the quiet streets of their modest neighborhood, through the crunch of gravel as she pulled into their driveway. The house was small but well-maintained, a two-bedroom ranch that she and Daniel had bought 7 years ago when she was pregnant with Sophie. They had planned to renovate it together, to add a third bedroom for the sibling they hoped Sophie would have someday, to build a deck in the backyard where they could grill burgers on summer evenings. None of that had happened. The renovations. The sibling. The summer evenings with Daniel flipping burgers while Sophie chased fireflies across the lawn. Cancer had stolen all of it. Now the house was just the place where Marley and Sophie lived, where they kept going day after day because stopping wasn't an option. Inside, Marley went through the motions of normalcy. She helped Sophie with her homework. She heated up leftover casserole for dinner. She sat on the couch and watched her daughter's favorite cartoon, even though every few minutes her mind drifted back to Sector 4 and that terrible whistling sound. "Mommy, you're not watching." Marley blinked and focused on the television where animated animals were having some kind of adventure. "Sorry, sweetheart. I got distracted." "It's okay." Sophie snuggled closer, her small body warm against Marley's side. "Are you sad because of the mean man at work?" "A little bit, but I'll be okay." "Will you have to find a new job?" The question hit Marley like a punch to the stomach. She hadn't even begun to think about the practical implications. The mortgage payment due in 3 days, the medical bills from Daniel's treatment that she was still paying off, the health insurance that had just evaporated along with her job. "Probably," she admitted, "but that's nothing for you to worry about. Okay, Mommy will figure it out. I always do." Sophie was quiet for a moment, her eyes on the television, but clearly thinking about something else. "Daddy used to say you could fix anything." Marley's throat tightened. Yeah, he did. "He said you were the smartest, bravest person he ever knew. He told me that when he was in the hospital. He said as long as you were there, everything would be okay." The tears came then hot and sudden, streaming down Marley's cheeks before she could stop them. She pulled Sophie close and buried her face in her daughter's hair, holding on to the only piece of Daniel she had left. "I miss him too, Mommy," Sophie whispered. "I know, baby. I know." They stayed like that for a long time, the cartoon playing forgotten in the background. Outside, the sun continued its descent. Shadows lengthened across the lawn. Night crept in with all its attendant fears and uncertainties. Eventually, Sophie fell asleep against Marley's shoulder. Carefully, Marley carried her to her bedroom and tucked her under the star-covered blanket that Daniel had picked out when they were decorating the nursery. "Love you, sweetheart," Marley whispered, kissing Sophie's forehead. "More than anything in the whole world." She closed the door softly and walked back to the living room. The house felt too quiet now, too empty, too full of memories and ghosts. Her phone sat on the coffee table. She picked it up and stared at it for a long moment, then opened her contacts and scrolled to a name she hadn't called in months. Walter Brennan. The old man was 65 now and had retired from Hartwell 2 years ago. He had been her mentor from the very first day, the one who taught her that machines had languages of their own if you knew how to listen. The one who showed her that being a good mechanic wasn't about knowing all the answers. It was about asking the right questions. She hesitated with her thumb over the call button. What would she even say? That she had been fired? That she had failed to convince management of a danger that might not even be real? Before she could decide, her phone buzzed with an incoming message. It was from Marcus. "Checked Sector 4 like you asked. That whistling sound is definitely there. Something's not right. But Dennis told me to forget about it. Said Victor sent out a memo about not overreacting to false alarms. Everyone's scared to say anything after what happened to you." Marley read the message 3 times. She had been right. The danger was real. And now there was nothing she could do about it. She turned on the television and flipped to the local news, trying to distract herself. The anchor was talking about weather patterns and traffic and all the mundane things that filled the hours between real stories. And then the screen changed. "Breaking news from Pennsylvania tonight. A catastrophic explosion at a chemical processing plant has left at least 3 workers dead and dozens injured. Preliminary reports suggest the disaster may have been caused by a pressure valve failure that went undetected for several days. Investigators say warning signs were present but were not acted upon in time." Marley sat frozen as footage played across the screen. Fire trucks and ambulances, workers being carried out on stretchers, a building reduced to twisted metal and smoking rubble. According to sources inside the company, The anchor continued. Several employees had reported concerns about the pressure systems in the days leading up to the explosion. Those concerns were allegedly dismissed by management as unfounded. The remote control slipped from Marley's fingers and clattered to the floor. This was it. This was exactly what she had been trying to prevent. And somewhere in Hartwell Industrial, the same disaster was building. The same pressure was mounting. The same warning signs were being ignored. She grabbed her phone and opened a new message to Victor Hale. Her fingers trembled as she typed. Watch the news. Pennsylvania chemical plant explosion. Pressure valve failure. Same warning signs I reported today. Please take this seriously. She hit send, then she deleted the message and typed another one. I know you fired me. I know you think I'm creating problems. But people's lives are at stake. Please just have someone check Sector 4. She sent that one too. Then she sat back and waited, staring at her phone, willing it to buzz with a response. With an acknowledgement. With anything. But the screen remained dark. Minutes passed, then an hour, then two. Marley checked on Sophie, who was sleeping peacefully. She walked through the empty house, touching the photographs on the walls. Their wedding day. Sophie's first birthday. Daniel teaching their daughter how to ride a bike in the backyard. A lifetime of memories. A lifetime of love. All of it leading to this moment, this house, this woman pacing the floors at midnight, while disaster crept closer to people she cared about. At one point, she found herself standing in front of the hall closet, staring at the old toolbox on the top shelf. It was the same toolbox she had used on her first day at Hartwell, the same one Walter Brennan had shown her how to organize. A good mechanic keeps their tools ready, Walter had told her, because you never know when someone's going to need you. Marley reached up and pulled the toolbox down. It was heavier than she remembered, or maybe she was just tired. Either way, she carried it to the kitchen table and sat down, running her fingers over the worn metal surface. Her phone finally buzzed. She grabbed it, hoping against hope that it was Victor, finally coming to his senses. But it wasn't Victor. It was an automated message from her bank reminding her that her mortgage payment was due in 3 days. Marley laughed. It was not a happy sound. She set the phone down and looked at the toolbox again, at the photographs on the wall, at the closed door of Sophie's bedroom. Daniel had believed in her. He had told their daughter that mommy could fix anything. But how could she fix something she wasn't allowed to touch? How could she save people who wouldn't let her help outside the wind picked up? Trees scratched against the windows like fingers trying to get in. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked at shadows only it could see. And 40 miles away in the depths of Sector 4, at Hartwell Industrial Metal continued to strain. Pressure continued to build. Microscopic cracks continued to spread through aging pipes that should have been replaced years ago. The whistling grew louder. But no one was listening. Sleep would not come. Marley lay in her bed staring at the ceiling, watching shadows dance across the plaster as car headlights swept past outside. The digital clock on her nightstand blinked through the minutes with cruel indifference. 11:42, 11:43, 11:44. Each minute felt like an hour. Each hour felt like a lifetime. The images from the Pennsylvania news report played on an endless loop in her time. The twisted metal, the smoke rising against the night sky, the stretchers carrying the workers who had probably been laughing and joking with their colleagues just hours before disaster struck. 3 dead, dozens injured, an entire community devastated because someone had ignored the warning signs. She rolled onto her mat and looked at the empty pillow next to her. Daniel's pillow. She still hadn't moved it, couldn't bring herself to. Some nights when the loneliness became too heavy to bear, she would press her face against it and pretend she could still smell him. His aftershave, his shampoo, the faint trace of motor oil that never quite washed out of his hair no matter how many times he showered. Daniel had been a mechanic too. That was how they met. 2 grease monkeys at a classic car show in Toledo arguing about the best way to restore a 1967 Mustang. He had been wrong about the carburetor settings, and she had told him so in no uncertain terms. He asked her to marry him 6 months later. "You're the only person who's ever told me I was wrong and made me grateful for it," he had said down on one knee in that same parking lot where they first argued. "I want to spend the rest of my life being wrong with you." The rest of his life had been 8 years, not nearly long enough. Marley closed her eyes and tried to quiet her thoughts. She needed to sleep. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Finding a new job, explaining to Sophie why Mommy wasn't going to the factory anymore, figuring out how to make the mortgage payment with no income. But every time she started to drift off, she heard it again. That whistling sound. It echoed in her memory like a ghost refusing to be exorcised. High-pitched and insistent, the voice of metal under impossible stress, the cry of a system begging for help. At 12:15, she gave up on sleep entirely. She got out of bed, pulled on her robe, and padded quietly to the kitchen. The house was silent except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of wind moving through the trees outside. She made herself a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around the warm mug, her eyes fixed on nothing. Her phone lay on the table in front of her. She had checked it a dozen times already, hoping for a response from Victor or Marcus or anyone. But the screen remained stubbornly blank. Maybe she was wrong. The thought crept in like a thief in the night. Maybe Victor Hale was right. Maybe she had been imagining problems that didn't exist. Maybe 12 years of hypervigilance had finally tipped over into paranoia. But even as she thought it, she knew it wasn't true. She had heard that sound before. 20 years ago, when she was still an apprentice, working at a small machine shop in Cleveland. A pressure line had developed a leak that nobody caught in time. The explosion had killed 2 men and left a third with burns over 60% of his body. Marley had been in the break room when it happened. She still remembered the sound. The thunderclap of rupturing metal, the screams that followed, the acrid smell of superheated hydraulic fluid mixing with something worse. She had sworn that day that she would never let something like that happen on her watch. And for 12 years she had kept that promise. Until today. 40 miles away, the night shift at Hartwell Industrial was grinding through its usual routine. Rachel Brooks sat alone in the control room, her eyes moving between the bank of monitors that covered the wall in front of her. She was 26 years old and had been working at Hartwell for just over a year. This was her first real job out of technical school, and she had been determined to prove herself. But tonight something was wrong. The pressure readings from Sector 4 had been fluctuating all evening. Not dramatically, not enough to trigger any of the automatic alarms, but enough to create a pattern that didn't match anything in her training manuals. She pulled up the historical data on her main screen and scrolled back through the past several weeks. The fluctuations had been getting progressively worse, so gradually that each day's readings seemed normal in isolation. It was only when you looked at the trend line that the pattern became clear. Something was building. Rachel thought about Marley Dawson. She had only worked with the older woman a few times, but she had been impressed by her knowledge and her patience. Marley had taken the time to explain systems that other senior workers couldn't be bothered to discuss. She had treated Rachel like a colleague, not an inconvenience. And now Marley was gone, fired for doing exactly what Rachel was considering doing right now. Her hand hovered over the phone. She should call someone, report the anomaly, let the supervisors make the decision. But Victor Hale's memo from earlier that day burned in her memory. Effective immediately, all non-emergency concerns regarding equipment status must be submitted in writing through proper channels. Verbal reports of unconfirmed issues will not be tolerated. Any employee found to be spreading unsubstantiated alarm will face disciplinary action up to and including termination. The message was clear. Keep your head down. Do your job. Don't make waves. Rachel looked at the fluctuating numbers on her screen. They were still within acceptable parameters. Technically, barely, she could submit a written report in the morning. That would cover her if anything went wrong, and nothing was going to go wrong tonight. The sensors were probably just dirty. The calibration might be slightly off. Everything would look better in the morning. She turned back to her regular monitoring tasks and tried to ignore the nagging feeling in her gut. On the factory floor, Marcus Webb was making his rounds. He was a big man, 6'3", and built like a linebacker from his days playing college football before a knee injury ended that dream. Now he put that strength to use hauling equipment and wrestling with stubborn machinery. But tonight his size felt useless. You couldn't intimidate a pressure gauge into behaving. Marley's text message had been bothering him all evening. She wasn't the type to cry wolf. In all the years he had known her, she had never once reported a problem that wasn't real. If she said something was wrong in Sector 4, then something was wrong in Sector 4. He had checked the area during his first break, just a quick walkthrough to see if anything obvious jumped out at him. Everything had seemed normal. The machines hummed along. The gauges showed acceptable readings. The workers went about their tasks with the bored efficiency of people who had done the same job 1,000 times before. But he hadn't really been listening. Now at nearly 1 in the morning, he decided to check again. This time he would do it properly, the way Marley had taught him. He walked slowly through Sector 4, his boots echoing on the concrete floor. Most of the workers were on break, leaving the area relatively quiet. Just the constant drone of the machinery and the hiss of pneumatic systems doing their endless work. Marcus stopped walking and closed his eyes. Listen, Marley had told him once. Don't just hear. Listen. Machines talk to you if you know their language. At first he heard nothing unusual. The same sounds he had heard 1,000 times before. The rhythm of pistons, the whir of motors, the click and clatter of automated processes. And then underneath it all, like a whisper trying to be heard over a crowd, the whistling. Marcus opened his eyes. His heart was suddenly beating faster. It was faint, so faint that he almost convinced himself he was imagining it. But the more he listened, the clearer it became. A high-pitched tone coming from somewhere deep within the main pressure line, a sound that had no business being there. He pulled out his phone and called the control room. Rachel answered on the second ring. Control room, Brooke speaking. Rachel, this is Marcus down in Sector 4. I need you to check the pressure readings on the main line. There was a pause. When Rachel spoke again, her voice was careful. The readings are showing within normal parameters. I don't care what the readings show. There's a sound coming from this line that shouldn't be here. Something's not right. Marcus, you know about the memo. If I start flagging unconfirmed issues, to hell with the memo. Marcus fought to keep his voice level. I'm telling you something is wrong. Marley Dawson warned us about this before she left. She was right. The mention of Marley's name had an effect Marcus hadn't intended. He heard Rachel's breath catch, and when she spoke again, her voice had hardened. Marley Dawson was fired for causing exactly this kind of unnecessary alarm. Look, I've been watching the readings all night. They're a little erratic, but nothing dangerous. The sensors are probably just due for recalibration. Rachel. I'm sorry, Marcus. I really am. But I can't risk my job over a sound that might not even be real. Submit a written report if you want it on record. The line went dead. Marcus stood alone in the empty sector, the phone still pressed to his ear, listening to silence. Around him, the machines continued their work. Above him, the pressure line continued its slow journey toward catastrophe. And somewhere in that line, metal was beginning to fail. In the control room, Rachel Brooks set down the phone and tried to focus on her monitors. But her hands were shaking. She pulled up the Sector 4 readings again. The numbers stared back at her, dancing between normal and slightly elevated. It was like watching a heart monitor for someone who might or might not be having a heart attack. Maybe Marcus was right. Maybe something was wrong, but what if he wasn't? What if she reported a false alarm and ended up like Marley Dawson, walking out of the building with a cardboard box of personal belongings and no idea how to pay her bills? Rachel had student loans, rent, a car payment. She couldn't afford to be wrong. She minimized the Sector 4 display and turned her attention to other parts of the facility. Everything else was running smoothly. Production was actually ahead of schedule for the night. Victor Hale would be pleased when he reviewed the reports in the morning. The thought of Victor Hale made her stomach turn. She had only interacted with him a few times, but each encounter had left her feeling smaller. He had a way of looking at people that made them feel like insects. Useful for a specific purpose, but entirely disposable once that purpose was served. The clock on the wall showed 1:23 in the morning. She should call Dennis Palmer. He was the night shift supervisor technically responsible for making decisions exactly like this one. Let him be the one to decide whether Marcus's concerns were worth pursuing. But Dennis had made his position clear earlier in the shift. No more false alarms, no more crying wolf. If the sensors showed green, then everything was green. Rachel looked at the Sector 4 display one more time. The numbers were still fluctuating, still dancing, still trying to tell her something. She reached for the phone. Then she pulled her hand back. Then she reached for it again. The internal war lasted nearly a minute. Finally, she picked up the phone and dialed Dennis's extension. He answered with the groggy irritation of someone who had been dozing in his office. What is it? Dennis, it's Rachel. I'm getting some weird readings from Sector 4. Marcus just called from the floor saying he heard something unusual in the pressure lines. There was a long pause. When Dennis spoke again, his voice was flat. What do the sensors show? Within normal range, but there's been consistent fluctuation all night. If you look at the trend over the past few weeks, are we in the red? Nobody yellow, and no, technically we're still in green, but then we're fine, bang. Dennis's voice brooked no argument. Look, I get it. Marley Dawson spooked everyone with her doom and gloom nonsense. But she's gone now, and we need to focus on doing our jobs, not inventing problems that don't exist. I just think someone should take a closer look, maybe do a manual inspection of the line. And I think you should focus on your screens and let management worry about the big picture. Victor Hale was very clear about this. We don't need any more heroes trying to save the day from imaginary disasters. Rachel closed her eyes. Understood. Good. Call me if anything actually goes wrong, otherwise let me get some sleep. The line went dead. Rachel sat back in her chair and looked at the ceiling. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, but indifferent to her turmoil. She thought about Marley Dawson again, about the way she had walked out of that conference room with her head held high, even as her career crumbled around her, about the little girl waiting outside too young to understand what was happening, but old enough to know it was bad. That was courage, real courage, speaking the truth even when it cost you everything. Rachel wasn't sure she had that kind of courage. She turned back to her monitors and watched the numbers continue their slow, ominous dance. At 2 in the morning, Marley finally gave up on sleep entirely. She had spent the last hour lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, running through every possible scenario in her mind, every memory of pressure system failures she had witnessed or studied, every warning sign she knew to look for, every worst-case outcome she had been trained to prevent. And always underneath it all, that question, what if she was right? What if something terrible was happening right now while she lay here helpless? She got out of bed and walked to Sophie's room. The door was slightly ajar, the way Sophie liked it, letting in just enough light from the hallway to keep the monsters at bay. Marley pushed the door open gently and stepped inside. Sophie was sprawled across her bed, one arm wrapped around her stuffed rabbit, her mouth slightly open as she breathed in the deep rhythm of childhood sleep. She looked so peaceful, so innocent, so completely unaware of the chaos swirling around her life. Marley walked to the bed and sat down carefully on the edge. She reached out and brushed a strand of hair from Sophie's forehead, the same gesture she made every night when she tucked her daughter in. I don't know what to do, baby, she whispered. I don't know how to fix this. Sophie stirred slightly but didn't wake. Your daddy would know. He always knew. He would tell me to trust my instincts to do what's right even when it's hard. She looked at the photographs on Sophie's dresser. A picture of all three of them at the beach the summer before Daniel got sick. Sophie was maybe 3 years old, laughing as her father held her over the waves. Marley was in the background, smiling at her family with a joy that seemed almost impossible now. I miss him so much, she said to no one. I miss him every single day. Sophie's rabbit had slipped from her grasp. Marley picked it up and tucked it back under her daughter's arm. I'll figure this out, she promised. I'll find a way. For you. She was about to stand up when her phone buzzed in her pocket. The sound made her heart lurch. At 2 in the morning, a phone call could only mean one thing. Something was wrong. She pulled out the phone and looked at the screen. Victor Hale. For a long moment, Marley just stared at the name. Part of her wanted to ignore it, to let it ring through to voicemail and deal with whatever he wanted in the morning. But another part of her knew. She stepped out of Sophie's room, pulling the door closed behind her, and answered the call. Hello. The voice on the other end was unrecognizable. Gone was the cold arrogance she had heard in the conference room. Gone was the smug superiority of a man who thought he knew everything. In its place was something raw and ragged. Fear. Mrs. Dawson, Marley, Victor Hale took a breath that sounded more like a cape. I need your help. Marley leaned against the hallway wall, her heart pounding. What happened? You were right about everything. Sector 4 is... Another ragged breath. The pressure readings are climbing. We're at 185% and rising. The automatic shutdown protocols aren't responding. The relief valves won't engage. Marley's blood ran cold, 185%. At that level, they were already in the danger zone. The pipes in Sector 4 were old. They had been scheduled for replacement 3 years ago, but the budget had never been approved. Have you evacuated? We're in the process. But Marley, I don't know how to stop this. None of my people know how to stop this. The technical manuals aren't helping. The corporate emergency line is taking too long. I need someone who understands these systems. You need to get everyone out. Now. Don't wait for a controlled shutdown. Just evacuate. We are, but if we can't get this under control, the explosion will take out sectors 3 and 5 as well. Half the factory. Maybe more. Marley closed her eyes. She thought about Marcus, about Rachel, about the dozens of workers on the night shift who had families waiting for them at home, about the security guard, Jimmy, who had apologized as he escorted her out, about everyone she had worked with for 12 years. And she thought about Sophie asleep in the next room who needed her mother to come home. Please, Victor said, and the words seemed to cost him something. I know I don't deserve your help. I know what I did to you was wrong. But people are going to die if we can't fix this. Please. Marley opened her eyes. I'm on my way. She ended the call and immediately dialed another number. Mrs. Patterson answered on the fourth ring, her voice thick with sleep. Marley, what's wrong? Helen, I need a favor. I need you to come watch Sophie. Something's happened at the factory. People are in danger. There was a pause. Then with the calm efficiency of someone who had lived through crises before, Mrs. Patterson said, I'll be there in 5 minutes. Marley was dressed and ready by the time Mrs. Patterson arrived. She met the older woman at the door, already pulling on her jacket. Sophie's asleep. She shouldn't wake up, but if she does, just tell her I had to go to work early. Tell her everything's fine. Mrs. Patterson nodded, her eyes full of the understanding that only came with age. You be careful, Marley. Whatever's happening over there, don't be a hero. I'm not trying to be a hero. I'm just trying to make sure everyone comes home. She kissed Mrs. Patterson on the cheek and ran to her truck. The drive to Hartwell Industrial normally took 40 minutes. Tonight, with the roads empty and her foot heavy on the gas, Marley made it in 25. As she pulled into the parking lot, her breath caught in her throat. The factory looked like something from a disaster movie. Emergency lights were flashing. Workers were streaming out of the exits, some running, others walking in the dazed manner of people who couldn't quite believe what was happening. Fire trucks were already on scene, their red lights painting everything in shades of blood. Marley parked as close as she could and ran toward the main entrance. She found Victor Hale standing just outside, his face pale and slick with sweat. His immaculate suit was rumpled now, his tie loosened, his hair disheveled. He looked like a man who had aged 10 years in the past hour. Marley, he grabbed her arm as soon as she was within reach. Thank God. Thank God you came. What's the current status? 190% and climbing. The main relief valve is completely stuck. We've tried everything in the manual, but nothing's working. Show me. They ran into the building together, past workers heading the other direction, past security guards trying to maintain order, past the conference room where just hours ago, Victor had ended her career. The control room was chaos. Rachel Brooks was at her station, tears streaming down her face as she watched the numbers climb on her screen. Dennis Palmer was on the phone shouting at someone on the other end. 2 other technicians were frantically flipping through technical manuals, searching for a solution that wasn't there. What's our time frame? Marley demanded, cutting through the noise. Rachel looked up, her eyes widening when she saw who had spoken. Marley, what are you time frame now? At the current rate of increase, we have maybe 15 to 20 minutes before we hit critical failure. If the main line ruptures at this pressure level, the explosion will take out everything from Sector 3 to Sector 5. Maybe more. Mark. Marley looked at the schematic of the pressure system displayed on the main screen. Her mind was already running through the possibilities, discarding solutions, searching for the one path that might lead to survival. The manual override, she said. The bypass on the main line. Has anyone tried that? Dennis looked up from his phone call. The bypass is in the middle of Sector 4. The pressure's too high. Anyone who goes in there now is walking into a death trap. Then we need to reduce the pressure enough to buy some time. What about the secondary relief valves? Rachel shook her head. We've tried. They're not responding either. It's like the whole system is locked up. Marley stared at the screen, her heart pounding. There had to be a way. There was always a way. And then she saw it. There, she said, pointing at a junction point on the schematic, the secondary bypass on line 7. It's not meant to handle this kind of load, but if we can divert even part of the pressure through there, it might give us enough time to reach the manual override. That's insane, Dennis said. Line 7 isn't rated for anything close to this pressure. If we push too much through, it'll blow before we even reach the main problem. Then we don't push too much. We bleed it off slowly, just enough to bring the main line down to a manageable level. Victor stepped forward. Can it work? Marley met his eyes. I don't know, but it's the only option we have. There was a moment of silence as everyone in the room processed what she was saying. Then Victor turned to Dennis. Do it. Whatever she says, do it. Dennis looked like he wanted to argue. Then he looked at the pressure reading still climbing and nodded. Tell me what you need. Marley turned to the screens, her mind shifting into a mode she hadn't used in years. Not since the bad days when every decision meant life or death and there was no room for doubt. Rachel, I need you to monitor the pressure differential between the main line and line 7. Call out every change, no matter how small. Dennis, get me someone on the floor who can manually open the secondary bypass valve. It's going to need to be done in stages coordinated with what's happening up here. I'll do it myself. Marcus's voice came from the doorway. Marley turned. Marcus Webb stood there, covered in sweat, his eyes fierce with determination. I'm already down there. Tell me what to do. Marley felt something loosen in her chest. Okay, here's the plan. The plan was simple in theory. Reduce pressure through the secondary bypass. Create a window of opportunity. Reach the manual override before the whole system tore itself apart. Simple in theory, terrifying in practice. Marley stood at the control room console, her eyes fixed on the schematic, her mind running calculations that no textbook had ever taught her. This was the kind of knowledge that only came from years of experience. From watching, from listening, from learning the language of machines through trial and error and occasional disaster. Marcus, are you in position? His voice crackled through the speakers, slightly distorted by distance and interference. I'm at the secondary bypass valve. Ready when you are. Rachel, what's our current reading? 192% on the main line. Still climbing. Marley took a deep breath. The numbers were worse than she had hoped. They were running out of time. Okay, Marcus, I need you to open the bypass valve exactly 1/4 turn. No more, no less. Do it slowly. Count to 5 as you turn. Copy that. 1/4 turn, count to 5. Here we go. The room fell silent. Every eye was fixed on the monitors. Every breath was held. On the screen, the pressure reading flickered. 192, 191, 190. It's working, Rachel breathed. Mainline pressure is dropping. Line 7 status. Climbing but still within tolerance. 83%. Marley nodded. Marcus, give me another 1/4 turn. Same speed. On it. Again the number shifted. 189, 188, 186. But line 7 was climbing too. 87%. 89, 91. We're pushing the limits on the secondary line, Rachel warned. If we go much higher, we risk a rupture there instead. I know. Marley studied the numbers, running calculations in her head. Hold position, Marcus. Let it stabilize. Victor Hale stood behind her, his face ashen, his hands trembling slightly at his sides. He had not spoken since they entered the control room. The man who had been so confident, so certain of his own superiority, now looked like a child lost in a nightmare. Can you stop it? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Marley didn't look at him. I don't know yet, but I'm going to treat. The numbers continued their slow descent. 184, 182, 180. Okay, Marley said, that's bought us some time, but we're not out of danger yet. The main relief valve is still stuck. Until we can manually override the system, we're just delaying the inevitable. What do you need? Victor asked. I need to get into Sector 4. The manual override is inside the main housing unit. It's the only way to fully release the pressure buildup. Dennis Palmer stepped forward, his face grim. You can't go in there, even at 180%. If something gives way, you'll be killed instantly. Then I'll have to make sure nothing gives way. Marley turned to Rachel. Keep monitoring the secondary bypass. If line 7 starts approaching critical well, Marcus to close the valve immediately. We can't save Sector 4 by destroying everything else. Rachel nodded, her face pale but determined. Understood. Marcus, hold your position. I'm coming to you. She was halfway to the door when Victor's voice stopped her. I'm coming with you. Marley turned. Victor Hale stood there, his jaw set, his eyes holding something she had never seen in them before. Resolve. You don't have to do that. Yes, I do. He swallowed hard. This is my fault, all of it. The pressure buildup, the stuck valves, the fact that we're in this situation at all. I made decisions that I thought were about efficiency, but they were really about my own ego. If people die tonight, their blood is on my hands. Marley studied him for a long moment. She thought about everything he had done. The humiliation in the conference room, the dismissal of her warnings, the smug certainty that he knew better than everyone else. And she thought about second chances, about the possibility that even the worst of us can change. Fine, she said, but you do exactly what I tell you when I tell you. No arguments, no questions, understood. Victor nodded, understood. Sector 4 was a war zone. The alarms had been silenced to prevent panic, but the danger was written in every vibrating pipe, every groaning weld, every hiss of pressure, finding its way through microscopic cracks. The air itself felt wrong, heavy and charged like the atmosphere before a thunderstorm. Marley moved quickly through the maze of machinery, her boots echoing on the concrete floor. Victor followed close behind, his expensive shoes, slipping occasionally on patches of oil and hydraulic fluid. They found Marcus at the secondary bypass valve, his massive frame dwarfed by the industrial equipment surrounding him. His face was slick with sweat, but his hands were steady on the valve wheel. Marley, thank God. He looked at Victor with barely concealed contempt, but said nothing. How does it look down here? Bad. The main line is shaking like it's about to come apart. I've been listening to it for the past 10 minutes and the sound is getting worse. Marley listened. The whistling she had heard that morning had transformed into something deeper. A groan, a cry of metal pushed beyond its limits. The manual override is in the main housing unit, she said, pointing to a large metal enclosure about 50 feet away. I need to get in there and release the pressure directly. The housing unit? Marcus's eyes widened. Marley, that thing is sitting right on top of the main pressure line. If something blows while you're in there, I know, but it's the only way. She started toward the housing unit, Victor and Marcus falling into step behind her. The closer they got, the louder the groaning became. The vibration traveled up through the floor into her legs, into her chest, until she could feel her own heartbeat synchronizing with the rhythm of the failing machinery. They reached the housing unit. Marley grabbed the handle of the access panel and pulled. It didn't move. She pulled again harder. Nothing. What's wrong? Victor asked. Marley's blood ran cold as she examined the panel more closely. What she saw made her stomach drop. The access panel had been welded shut. Not just locked, not just sealed, welded. Someone had taken a torch to the edges and fused the metal together, making it impossible to open without cutting through. Who did this? Marley demanded, turning to Victor. His face went white. I ordered it. 3 weeks ago. The maintenance crews were spending too much time doing manual inspections of the override system. I thought if we sealed the housing, it would force them to rely on the automated controls instead. Save time, increase efficiency. Marley stared at him. For a moment, she couldn't speak. The sheer stupidity of what he was describing was beyond comprehension. You welded shut the manual override, she said slowly, because you wanted to save time on inspections. I didn't think. No, you didn't think. That's exactly the problem. She turned back to the welded panel, her mind racing. They needed to get inside. They needed to access the override. And they needed to do it in the next 10 minutes or none of it would matter. Marcus, my toolbox is in my truck. There should be a cutting torch in the back. Can you get it? I'm on it. Marcus took off running, his heavy footsteps echoing through the empty sector. Marley placed her hand on the housing unit. The metal was warm, too warm. The pressure inside was building and the system was running out of ways to contain it. How long do we have? Victor asked. Not long enough. The next few minutes felt like hours. Marcus returned with the cutting torch, his chest heaving from the sprint. Marley grabbed it and immediately began working on the welded seam, the blue flame hissing as it bit into the metal. Rachel, status report, she called out, knowing the control room speakers would pick up her voice. Rachel's voice came through the overhead system. Main line is at 178%. Line 7 is at 94%. We're running out of room on the secondary bypass. Understood. Hold position for now. The flame cut through the first weld point, then the second. The metal glowed orange, then red, then white, as it finally gave way. But the door still wouldn't open. There were more welds, too many. Come on, Marley muttered through gritted teeth. Come on. The groaning from the main line was getting louder. The vibration was intensifying. Somewhere in the maze of pipes, something cracked with a sound like a gunshot. Victor flinched. What was that? A seal giving way. We're running out of time. Marley attacked the remaining welds with renewed fury. Her arms ached. Her eyes burned from the intensity of the flame. But she didn't stop. Another weld gave way. Then another. Main line at 182%, Rachel's host announced. The pressure is climbing again. Whatever you're doing, please do it faster. The final weld broke free. Marley dropped the torch and grabbed the panel with both hands, pulling with all her strength. The metal groaned in protest, warped by the heat, but finally swung open. Inside the housing unit, the manual override wheel gleamed under the emergency lights. It looked so simple. Just a wheel and a shaft connected to the main pressure line. Turn the wheel, release the pressure, save everyone. But the wheel was frozen. Marley grabbed it and pulled. Nothing. She braced her feet and tried again, putting every ounce of strength into the effort. The wheel didn't budge. It's stuck, she said, her voice tight with frustration. The pressure differential is too high. The valve can't move against this kind of force. What do we do? Victor asked. Marley's mind raced through every possibility, every technique she had ever learned, every trick she had ever seen. And then she thought of Walter. Walter Brennan, the man who had taught her everything she knew about pressure systems, the man who had spent 40 years learning the secrets that no manual could contain. She pulled out her phone and dialed his number. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Come on, Walter, pick up. 4 times, 5 times, and then a voice, rough with sleep but sharp with awareness. Marley, what's wrong? Walter, I need your help. I'm at Hartwell. We have a pressure system failure in Sector 4. The manual override is frozen. The valve won't turn. We have maybe 5 minutes before the whole thing blows. There was a pause. When Walter spoke again, his voice was calm and steady, the voice of a man who had faced disaster before and survived. The override won't turn because you're fighting the pressure. You can't muscle through it. You have to work with it. What do you mean? There's an old technique. We used to call it the heartbeat method. You don't try to force the valve open. You create a resonance in the system that momentarily reduces the resistance. It's all about timing. Tell me how. Feel the vibration in the system. The pressure has a rhythm like a pulse. At the peak of each pulse, the valve is under maximum stress. But at the trough, there's a split second of reduced pressure. That's when you turn the wheel. Marley closed her eyes and placed her hands on the valve wheel. She could feel the vibration. The pulse that Walter was describing. It was there, hidden beneath the chaos, a rhythm as steady as a heartbeat. I feel it, she said. Good. Now at each trough, you are going to tap the pressure point on the left side of the valve housing. 3 quick taps, then turn. The taps create a micro vibration that disrupts the pressure wave. It's only going to give you a fraction of a second, but that's all you need. 3 taps, then turn. You've got this, Marley. Trust yourself. She ended the call and turned to Victor. I need you to count down the pulse for me. Watch the housing. Every time it shudders, that's a peak. The moment between its shudders is the trough. Call it out. Victor nodded, his eyes fixed on the housing. Okay, I see it. Peak, peak, trough now. Marley tapped the pressure point 3 times and turned the wheel. It moved, just a fraction of an inch. But it moved. Again, she said. Keep counting. Peak, peak, trough. 3 taps. Turn, another fraction of an inch. It's working, Marcus said, his voice filled with disbelief. Holy hell, it's actually working. Main line at 185%, Rachel announced. Still climbing, but the rate has slowed. Keep going, Marley said. Don't stop. Peak, peak, trough, tap, 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 turn. Peak, peak, trough, tap, 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 turn. The wheel was moving more freely now, each turn releasing a burst of pressure with a hiss that sounded like the world's largest pressure cooker venting steam. 180, Victor called out, his eyes on his phone. 175. 170. Marley's arms were burning. Her whole body trembled with exhaustion. But she kept going. Peak, peak, trough, tap, 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 turn. 160, 155, 150. The groaning from the pipes was diminishing. The vibration was easing. The terrible pressure that had been building toward catastrophe was finally finding release. 140, 135. Marley gave the wheel one final turn and stepped back. The hissing continued, but it was controlled now. Manageable. The system was stabilizing. 125, Victor said, his voice cracking. 120, 115. Rachel's voice came through the speakers, trembling with relief. Mainline pressure returning to normal parameters. Secondary bypass stable. Sector 4 is secure. The silence that followed was the most beautiful sound Marley had ever heard. She leaned against the housing unit, her legs suddenly unable to support her weight. The adrenaline that had kept her going was draining away, leaving nothing but exhaustion and a profound sense of relief. They had done it. Against all odds, against every obstacle that had been thrown in their path, they had done it. Victor Hale sank to his knees beside her. His face was streaked with sweat and tears, his expensive suit ruined beyond repair. But in his eyes, Marley saw something she had never expected to see. Gratitude and shame. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you." Before Marley could respond, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out and saw a video call request from Mrs. Patterson's number. She answered immediately. Sophie's face filled the screen. Her daughter's eyes were red from crying, her hair disheveled from sleep, her expression a mixture of fear and hope. "Mommy, are you okay?" Marley felt her own tears coming then, hot and sudden and completely unstoppable. "Yeah, baby," she said, smiling through the tears. "I'm okay. I'm coming home soon." Mrs. Patterson said there was an emergency at the factory. She said you had to go help people. "That's right, sweetheart. But everything's okay now. Everyone's safe." Sophie's face relaxed into a smile, the same smile that Daniel used to have, the smile that could light up the darkest room. "I knew you would fix it, Mommy. You can fix anything." The sun was rising by the time the corporate investigation team arrived. They came in a convoy of black SUVs, their faces grim and professional, as they swept through the factory like an occupying army. Leading them was a woman named Elizabeth Hartley, the chief counsel for Hartwell Industries Corporate. She was in her 50s with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. Marley was sitting in the break room nursing a cup of terrible coffee when Elizabeth found her. "Mrs. Dawson, I'm Elizabeth Hartley. I've heard a great deal about what happened here tonight." Marley looked up. "Then you know I was fired yesterday." "Yes, and I know you came back anyway." Elizabeth sat down across from her. "That's the kind of character that can't be taught. It can only be lived." "I didn't do it for the company. I did it for the people." "I know. That's exactly why I'm here." Elizabeth pulled out a tablet and placed it on the table between them. On the screen was a document filled with legal language that Marley couldn't begin to decipher. "We've completed a preliminary investigation into the events of last night," Elizabeth began. "What we found is deeply troubling. Safety protocols were systematically weakened over the past 3 months. Maintenance budgets were slashed. Critical inspections were skipped. And employees who raised concerns were silenced or terminated." She looked at Marley with something approaching respect. "You were right about everything. The pressure buildup, the failing seals, the danger. And we ignored you." "You fired me," Marley corrected. "There's a difference between ignoring and actively silencing." "You're right, and I apologize. On behalf of the entire company, I apologize." Marley took a sip of her coffee. It tasted like motor oil and regret. "What happens now?" "Gerald Whitmore has been suspended pending a full investigation. His decisions regarding maintenance budgets directly contributed to last night's near disaster." "And Victor Hale," Elizabeth's expression shifted. "Mr. Hale has already given a full statement. He took complete responsibility for the welded access panel. He admitted that his policies prioritized efficiency over safety. He's resigned his position effective immediately." Marley thought about Victor kneeling on the factory floor, tears streaming down his face, about the way he had counted out the pressure pulses without complaint, about the man he might become given the chance. He made mistakes, she said slowly, serious mistakes, but he also called me when things went wrong. He could have tried to handle it himself to cover it up. Instead, he swallowed his pride and asked for help. That has to count for something. Elizabeth studied her for a long moment. You're a remarkable person, Mrs. Dawson. Anyone else would be demanding his head on a platter. Demanding revenge doesn't bring back the 12 years of my career that he destroyed. It doesn't pay my mortgage or my medical bills. It just makes everyone feel worse. Then what do you want? Marley set down her coffee cup and met Elizabeth's eyes. I want to make sure this never happens again. Not here, not anywhere. I want workers to be able to report safety concerns without fear of being fired. I want maintenance schedules to be followed. I want the people who work in this factory to go home to their families every night. Elizabeth smiled. It was the first real smile Marley had seen from her. That's exactly what we want too, which is why I'm here to offer you a position. She slid the tablet across the table. Chief Safety Officer for this facility. Full authority over all safety protocols. Direct reporting to corporate bypassing local management. Your salary would be double what you were making before. Full benefits package including comprehensive health insurance for you and your daughter. Marley stared at the document. The words swam before her eyes. You want me to run safety for the company that fired me yesterday. I want you to transform safety for the company that fired you yesterday. To make sure that what happened to you never happens to anyone else. To be the voice that speaks up when others are afraid. Amashe. It was everything Marley had ever wanted. A position where she could make a real difference. The resources to actually prevent disasters instead of just reacting to them. Security for Sophie's future. But it was also the company that had humiliated her, that had called her paranoid, that had escorted her off the property in front of her daughter. Can I think about it? Take all the time you need. We'd like an answer by the end of the week. That afternoon, after a few hours of fitful sleep, Marley drove to a small house on the outskirts of town. Walter Brennan was waiting for her on the front porch, a cup of coffee in his weathered hands. He was 65 years old with white hair and a face lined by decades of hard work. But his eyes were still sharp, still curious, still alive with the passion that had made him the best mechanic Marley had ever known. Heard you had quite a night, he said as she climbed the porch steps. I couldn't have done it without you. She sat down in the chair beside him. That heartbeat technique, where did you learn it? Walter smiled. From an old-timer who taught me when I was your age. He learned it from someone else who learned it from someone else. That's how real knowledge gets passed down. Not through manuals and certifications, through people, through experience. They offered me a job, Chief Safety Officer. I heard, Elizabeth Hartley called me this morning, asked if I thought you were up to it. What did you tell her? Walter took a sip of his coffee. I told her you were the best student I ever had, that you understood machines in a way that can't be taught, that you had something more important than knowledge or skill. What's that heart? You care about people, Marley, not about numbers or efficiency or quarterly reports, about the actual human beings who show up every day and put their lives in the hands of systems they don't fully understand. Marley looked out at the quiet street. Children were playing in a yard across the way. A dog was barking somewhere in the distance. Normal life continuing on, unaware of how close it had come to being shattered. I don't know if I can work for them again. After everything they did. Then don't work for them. Work for the people they employ. The ones who don't have anyone else to advocate for them. The ones who will be hurt the next time some MBA decides that safety is an acceptable trade-off for profit. Walter reached over and placed his hand on her arm. You have a gift, Marley. The gift of listening, of hearing what machines are trying to tell us. Don't let pride rob the world of that gift. 2 weeks later, Marley Dawson walked into her new office for the first time. It was on the second floor of the administrative building with windows overlooking the factory floor. The desk was new, the chair was comfortable, and on the wall hung a framed photograph of her Victor and Marcus standing in Sector 4 on the night of the crisis. Someone had clipped the newspaper article and mounted it beneath the photo. Local mechanic saves factory after termination. The headline still made her uncomfortable. She hadn't done it for recognition. She had done it because it was right. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in." Sophie bounded through the doorway, her backpack bouncing on her shoulders, her face split by an enormous grin. "Mommy, your office is so cool." Marley laughed and scooped her daughter into a hug. "You think so? You can see everything from here. All the machines and the people and everything. That's the point, baby. So I can make sure everyone stays safe." Sophie wriggled out of her arms and immediately began exploring the office, examining every photograph and certificate with the intense curiosity of a 7-year-old. There was another knock at the door. Victor Hale stood in the doorway. He looked different now. The expensive suits were gone, replaced by practical work clothes. The arrogant posture had softened into something more humble. "Mrs. Dawson, do you have a moment?" "Come in, Victor." He entered hesitantly, his eyes darting to Sophie, who was now spinning in circles in Marley's office chair. "I wanted to let you know that I've enrolled in a safety management certification program. It's a 6-month intensive course, mostly remote. I'll be working here at the same time in the maintenance division." Marley raised an eyebrow. "Maintenance? I figured if I'm going to understand how this place really works, I need to start at the bottom. Learn from the people who actually keep things running." It was not what Marley had expected. The Victor Hale she had known would never have volunteered for manual labor, would never have admitted that he had anything left to learn. "That's actually very impressive," she said. Victor smiled. It was a tentative smile, uncertain of its welcome. "I've had a lot of time to think over the past 2 weeks, about who I was and who I want to be. I can't change what I did. I can't take back the harm I caused, but I can try to become someone better." Sophie had stopped spinning and was now watching the exchange with interest. "Mommy, is this the man who was mean to you?" Victor flinched, but he didn't look away. "Yes, Sophie, I was very mean to your mother, and I'm very, very sorry about that." Sophie studied him with the unfiltered judgment that only children possess. Then, apparently satisfied with what she saw, she nodded. "Mommy says everyone deserves a second chance. Do you want a second chance?" Victor's eyes glistened. "Yes, I do." "Then you should be nicer now." "I'm trying, Sophie. I promise I'm trying." A week after she started her new position, Marley organized a small ceremony in the break room. Walter Brennan stood at the front looking uncomfortable in a clean button-down shirt that his wife had clearly pressed for the occasion. His weathered hands held a plaque that read, "Honorary Safety Consultant," with his name engraved beneath. "I don't need any fancy titles," he had protested when Marley first suggested it. "I'm just an old man who knows a few tricks." "Those tricks saved this factory," Marley had replied, "and the people in it deserve to know who taught them." Now surrounded by workers who had heard the story of that night, Walter accepted the plaque with a gruffness that couldn't quite hide his emotion. "The real credit goes to Marley," he said, his voice rough. "I just answered the phone." "You answered the phone at 2 in the morning, Marcus called out from the back of the room. "And you knew exactly what to do. That's not nothing." Walter shrugged, but Marley could see the pride in his eyes. The pride of a craftsman whose knowledge had been passed on, whose legacy would continue long after he was gone. After the ceremony, they stood together by the window overlooking the factory floor. "You know," Walter said quietly, "when I retired, I thought that was the end of it. 40 years of learning and then nothing. Just an old man sitting on his porch waiting for the end. And now," Walter smiled, "now I know it wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of something different. The knowledge doesn't die when we do, Marley. It lives on in the people we teach." He placed his hand on her shoulder. "You're going to teach others, and they'll teach others. And somewhere down the line, someone will save lives because of what you learned from me and what I learned from the old-timers before me." Marley felt tears prick at her eyes. "That's a lot of pressure, Walter." "No," he said softly. "That's a gift, the only kind that really matters." 3 months passed, spring gave way to summer, and the factory hummed along with a rhythm that felt healthier than before. New safety protocols were in place. Maintenance schedules were being followed. Workers reported concerns without fear of retaliation. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever was, but it was better. One Saturday afternoon, Marley took Sophie out for ice cream at their favorite place downtown. They sat at a table outside watching people walk by, enjoying the warmth of the sun and the simple pleasure of being together. "Mommy, look at who's coming." Marley turned to see Victor Hale walking toward them. He was wearing jeans and a plain t-shirt, his face tanned from outdoor work, his posture relaxed in a way she had never seen before. Marley? Sophie, what a coincidence. Want to join us? Marley offered. Victor hesitated, then smiled. I'd like that. Thank you. He got himself a small cup of vanilla and sat down at their table. For a while, they just watched the world go by. It was strange, Marley thought, how comfortable this felt. Three people who had been adversaries just a few months ago now sitting together like old friends. How's the certification program going? She asked. Hard, harder than I expected, but good. I'm learning things I never knew I needed to know. And the maintenance work, Victor laughed. My back has never hurt this much in my life. But I'm starting to understand why people like Marcus take so much pride in what they do. There's something satisfying about fixing things with your own hands. Sophie had been listening intently to this conversation. Now she piped up with a question that only a child would ask. Are you nicer now? Victor looked at her, then at Marley, then back at Sophie. I hope so. I'm trying every day to be better than I was the day before. That's all anyone can do, really. Sophie considered this. Then she nodded, apparently satisfied. Good, because Mommy says holding grudges is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to get sick. Victor's eyebrows rose. That's very wise, Sophie. Daddy used to say it before he went to heaven. The mention of Daniel brought a momentary silence to the table. Marley felt the familiar ache in her chest, but it was softer now, more like a scar than an open wound. Your daddy sounds like he was a smart man, Victor said gently. He was the best. Sophie returned to her ice cream, the subject closed as only a child could close it. They finished their treats and walked together toward the parking lot. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the pavement. Birds sang in the trees overhead. It was a beautiful day, the kind of day that reminded you why life was worth fighting for. Sophie spotted something growing between the cracks in the pavement and ran toward it. Look, Mommy, dandelions. She picked one of the fluffy white seed heads and held it up, her eyes sparkling with delight. Can I make a wish? Of course, baby. Make a good one. Sophie closed her eyes and scrunched up her face in concentration. Then she took a deep breath and blew. The seeds scattered into the air, catching the afternoon breeze drifting across the parking lot like tiny wishes taking flight. Marley watched them go, these fragile bits of life spreading out into the world, carrying the hope of new growth to wherever they might land. What did you wish for? She asked. Sophie shook her head solemnly. Can't tell you, otherwise it won't come true. Victor laughed. It was a good sound, genuine. She's right, you know. The rules of wishes are very strict. They reached their cars and said their goodbyes. Sophie waved enthusiastically as Victor drove away. I like him better now, she announced as Marley buckled her into her seat. Me too, baby. Me too. That night, after Sophie was asleep, Marley sat alone in the living room. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that used to feel lonely, but now felt peaceful. She had made her peace with the silence, with the empty pillow on the other side of the bed, with the memories that lived in every corner of this small home. She picked up her phone and scrolled through the photos. Sophie's first day of school, the factory floor on a normal day, a selfie she and Daniel had taken on their last anniversary, both of them laughing at something she couldn't remember anymore, and a new photo taken just that morning. Walter Brennan standing in her office, his arm around her shoulders, both of them grinning at the camera. The plaque on the wall behind them gleaming under the fluorescent lights. 3 generations of knowledge. 3 generations of caring about things that mattered. Marley set down the phone and looked out the window at the stars. She thought about the night of the crisis, about running into a building that could have killed her, about choosing to help people who had hurt her, about finding the strength to do what was right even when it would have been so easy to walk away. She hadn't done it for revenge or recognition. She hadn't done it for the job offer that came later. She had done it because people's lives were at stake. Because her father had taught her that some things mattered more than pride. Because Daniel had believed she could fix anything and she had wanted to prove him right one more time. And maybe, just maybe, she had done it for Sophie, so that her daughter would grow up in a world where people still did the right thing, where courage still meant something, where a single mother mechanic from Ohio could make a difference that rippled outward like dandelion seeds on the wind. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new problems to solve, new battles to fight. But tonight, Marley Dawson was at peace. She had listened to the machines. She had heard their warning. And when it mattered most, she had been brave enough to act. That was enough. That would always be enough.